They told him the message would be short. It was the last broadcast Earth would ever send. Biological humans, the transmission declared, are no longer viable beyond the solar rim. Bone fractures under radiation. Minds decay under time dilation. Emotion becomes instability. Survival now requires surrender. The mandate was simple: abandon the body or be abandoned by the future. This audiobook is not about choice. It is about adaptation. It is about the moment science decides who gets to continue and who becomes history. Listen carefully, because evolution is no longer optional.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Accept the end of the human body. For centuries, humanity believed the body was a miracle of endurance. Bone healed, skin adapted, minds learned. On Earth, under its forgiving gravity and protective magnetosphere, the human form appeared resilient, almost timeless. That illusion shattered the moment civilizations stepped beyond the solar rim. They learned it first through silence. The long-range vessels sent to Proxima did not fail catastrophically. Their engines did not explode. Their hulls did not rupture. Instead, their transmissions grew delayed. Thoughts lagged behind speech. Crew logs repeated sentences without awareness. By the time the ships crossed the heliopause, time itself began to behave like an adversary. Radiation seeped through layers of shielding like an invisible tide, not enough to kill quickly, enough to rewrite cells slowly. DNA frayed, proteins misfolded, bones lost density molecule by molecule. The body tried to repair itself as it always had, but space offered no mercy window, no pause for healing. The doctors on Earth used a phrase they would repeat until it lost all comfort: sublethal degradation. Damage that never stopped accumulating, damage that could not be outrun. The body was never designed for infinity. Commander Hale understood this before the official mandate ever arrived. He felt it in the tremor of his hands as he floated through the observation ring, watching stars smear into pale arcs under relativistic drift. His muscles obeyed him more slowly now. His dreams fractured into overlapping memories, childhood on Earth layered over corridors of the ship, faces blurring into static. Sleep no longer reset him. It only rearranged the damage. Medical scans confirmed what he already knew: neural inflammation, microlesions in the hippocampus, emotional dysregulation linked to prolonged exposure to cosmic background radiation. The body, starved of gravity and rhythm, was beginning to misinterpret reality itself. Psychological fragmentation followed close behind the physical decay. Crews reported dissociation, moments when their thoughts felt borrowed, delayed, or duplicated. Some described hearing their own internal monologue echo a half-second late, as if consciousness itself struggled to keep pace with the universe. The body was never designed for infinity. Earth's scientists tried everything first: gene therapies, artificial gravity wells, rotational habitats, neural dampeners to reduce cognitive stress. Each solution extended viability by months, sometimes years, never indefinitely. Infinity always won. The problem was not a single flaw, it was the architecture. Human biology evolved for cycles: day and night, hunger and rest, birth and death. Space erased cycles. There was no horizon to anchor the mind, no seasonal rhythm to ground perception. In the void, time stretched, thinned, and lost meaning. The body followed. Sentimentality delayed the truth. Politicians spoke of human perseverance. Philosophers argued the body was sacred. Religions declared suffering a test. Meanwhile, the data accumulated without opinion. Survival curves fell, error rates climbed, mission success declined inversely with distance from Earth. Hale remembered the moment denial finally collapsed. A junior engineer, brilliant and methodical, began logging maintenance reports addressed to crew members who had died months earlier. When corrected, she nodded calmly and continued doing it. Her mind had decoupled memory from sequence. The body still breathed. The person was already gone. The body was never designed for infinity. This was the realization that reshaped everything. The enemy was not space. The enemy was time without shelter, radiation without boundary, distance without return. Biology demanded limits. The universe offered none. In private briefings, the phrase acceptable loss disappeared from official language. It was replaced by inevitable failure. You could reinforce the hull, you could shield the organs, you could medicate the mind, but you could not persuade cells to ignore physics forever. Humanity stood at a boundary more absolute than any planetary edge. Either the definition of human would change, or humanity would end where Earth's protection faded. The first proposals for synthetic cognition were dismissed as sacrilege. The second wave was dismissed as fantasy. The third arrived accompanied by projections so stark they silenced entire rooms. Consciousness, the data showed, did not require flesh. It required pattern continuity, signal integrity, memory persistence. All the things biology performed beautifully for a time. The body was a vessel, not the cargo. Hale received the preliminary ascension briefing 2 weeks before Earth's final transmission. He was not afraid of death. What unsettled him was the quiet relief he felt when the doctor spoke the words neural migration, as if some deeper part of him had already accepted the conclusion. At night, drifting in the observation ring, he repeated the phrase like a grounding mantra, not as despair, but as clarity. The body was never designed for infinity. Stars burned for billions of years. Black holes remembered everything they consumed. Machines did not age unless designed to. Only humans insisted on carrying fragility into a universe that punished it relentlessly. By the time Earth broadcast the mandate, the argument was already over. The message did not announce a choice. It confirmed a diagnosis. Human beings were no longer viable beyond the solar rim. Hale closed his eyes as the transmission echoed through the ship. Around him, systems hummed with artificial steadiness, machines, tireless and precise, waiting to carry what the body could not. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, humanity crossed the threshold, not away from itself, but away from the lie that it could remain unchanged forever. The body was never designed for infinity, and now the future would be.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. When Survival Overrides Identity. Identity had once been humanity's anchor. Names, faces, cultures, histories, each layer stacked to answer a single question: who am I? For most of civilization, survival depended on holding that answer steady. To lose identity was to lose purpose. To change it was betrayal. Beyond the solar rim, that logic collapsed. Commander Hale felt it first not as fear, but as confusion. In the weeks after the mandate, crew conversations shifted subtly. People spoke less about who they were and more about what they could endure. Identity, once a declaration, became a variable. The phrase circulated quietly at first, passed between engineers and medics like contraband wisdom. What you are is not what you must remain. No one knew who said it first. That made it easier to repeat. On Earth, identity had been protected by abundance. You could afford to define yourself rigidly, when food was reliable, gravity was constant, and death came slowly enough to be ritualized. Space stripped away that luxury. Out there, survival was not impressed by personal history. The first civilizations to confront this truth were not human. Archived transmissions from the Sirene Drift told the story of the Heliox Collective, a silicon-based species that once defined itself by physical symmetry. For millennia, asymmetry was considered a defect, a cultural taboo. When stellar radiation began distorting their crystalline forms, they faced extinction within 5 generations. They debated identity for 3. Then they rewrote it. Heliox bodies became modular, irregular, constantly adapting. Old aesthetics were erased. Their concept of self shifted from form to function. The collective survived. The original Heliox identity did not. What you are is not what you must remain. Human sociologists studied dozens of similar cases. Aquatic species that abandoned oceans when their stars warmed, hive minds that fragmented into individuals to escape collective collapse, cultures that treated identity not as inheritance but as equipment, used, modified, replaced. Every civilization that survived shared one trait: flexibility of self-definition. Every civilization that vanished clung to what it had been. Hale struggled with this more than most. His memories were anchored to Earth, blue skies, ocean gravity, the subtle resistance of air against skin. He had built his life around the idea of continuity. The same body, aging gradually, the same mind accumulating experience like sediment. But continuity was an Earth privilege. During a routine briefing, he watched a simulation of neural migration, consciousness mapped, translated, stabilized in a synthetic lattice. The model's voice was calm, familiar. The cadence matched Hale's speech patterns exactly. It unsettled him not because it felt alien, but because it felt accurate. If identity could be preserved without flesh, then what exactly was sacred about the body? What you are is not what you must remain. Resistance movements formed almost immediately after the mandate. They called themselves preservationists. Their symbol was the human silhouette, unaltered, arms outstretched as if to shield itself from change. They argued identity was inseparable from biology, that memory without muscle, emotion without hormones, was imitation, not continuity. Their broadcasts were passionate, their science was thin. Data from long-duration missions contradicted them mercilessly. Emotional stability improved in synthetic substrates. Memory recall sharpened. Empathy, once thought chemically dependent, emerged as a pattern phenomenon, replicable, even refinable. Identity, it turned out, was not a fixed point. It was a process. The mind did not mourn the loss of flesh the way philosophy predicted. It adapted. It reorganized. Given stable input and coherent feedback, consciousness recalibrated itself with startling efficiency. The body had been a scaffold, useful, temporary. Hale began noticing the change in himself. He referred to his hands less often. He stopped dreaming in gravity. When he imagined the future, he no longer pictured a face, only awareness, intact and unburdened. This frightened him less than it should have. What you are is not what you must remain. The final psychological hurdle was pride. Humans had always told themselves they were special because of who they were, not because of what they could become. Ascension inverted that belief. Worth was no longer inherited, it was demonstrated. Authorization replaced birthright. As Earth's biosphere deteriorated and the outer colonies prepared for irreversible departure, identity debates faded into logistics. People stopped asking, "Will I still be me?" and started asking, "Will I still think? Will I still choose? Will I still remember why I chose this?" The answers were not philosophical. They were operational. Yes, yes, and yes, if the transition was completed correctly. On the eve of his own authorization review, Hale stood again in the observation ring. Stars burned cold and patient beyond the hull. Somewhere behind him, machines waited to receive him, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. He whispered the phrase once more, not as surrender, but as resolve. What you are is not what you must remain. And for the first time, the words felt less of loss and more of permission. Because survival, he finally understood, did not care who you had been. It only asked whether you were willing to change.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. The Synthetic Ascension Protocol. The protocol did not begin with machines. It began with silence. Before any transfer, before any authorization, candidates were placed in isolation chambers, soundless, weightless, timeless. No gravity hum, no system alerts, no human voices. The first test was simple. Could the mind remain coherent without external anchors? Most could not. Commander Hale lasted 36 hours before the chamber lights returned. When the door opened, he did not gasp for air. He did not rush to speak. He simply listened to his own thoughts, still aligned, still sequential. The technicians marked a quiet symbol beside his name. Phase 1. Continuity verified. The Synthetic Ascension Protocol had been misrepresented in public discourse. Protesters called it augmentation. Politicians framed it as enhancement. Marketers, briefly, sold it as transcendence. Inside the Ascension Authority, the language was precise and unromantic. This is not enhancement. This is authorization. Authorization to exist where biology failed. The protocol unfolded in layers, each designed to strip illusion before granting permission. Neural mapping came next. High-resolution quantum scans traced synaptic pathways, memory clusters, emotional weighting, everything that made a mind recognizable to itself. The process took days. It was painless. It was intimate in a way no surgery had ever been. Candidates reported the same sensation, the unsettling feeling of being understood. Every memory was indexed, but not copied yet. Copying implied duplication. Ascension required continuity. There could be no second self, only the transfer of signal, uninterrupted. This is not enhancement, this is authorization. Synthetic cognition was not a single machine, but a framework, a lattice of adaptive substrates designed to host consciousness without constraining it. No fixed shape, no default body. The form came later, if at all. First, the mind had to exist without physical metaphor. Psychological conditioning was mandatory. Hale sat through hours of simulations where sensory input was deliberately distorted, time stretched, then compressed, colors shifted beyond human visible spectra. Auditory cues arrived before their causes. The goal was not to confuse, but to retrain expectation. Biological minds anticipated the universe to behave familiarly. Synthetic minds could not afford that assumption. What is real? The instructors asked repeatedly, not as a riddle, as a calibration. Candidates learned to identify reality not by comfort, but by consistency. Signal integrity mattered more than sensory familiarity. A painful truth repeated until it settled. Reality does not care how you feel about it. This is not enhancement, this is authorization. Identity pruning was the hardest. Certain neural loops, nostalgia amplification, grief recursion, fear of dissolution responses, were dampened, not erased. The authority called them legacy artifacts, useful once, dangerous now. Hale resisted here. Memories of Earth surged when the system flagged them for attenuation. Ocean gravity, wind, the weight of a body that obeyed without delay. For a moment, panic flared, not at losing them, but at losing the importance he had assigned to them. A counselor's voice cut through the surge, calm and rehearsed. You are not deleting yourself, you are stabilizing yourself. The system paused. Hale breathed. The memories remained, but quieter, less gravitational. This is not enhancement, this is authorization. Body replacement was the final phase, though many never reached it. Synthetic bodies were optional. Consciousness did not require limbs. Still, most candidates chose a form, something familiar enough to reduce cognitive load during early integration. The first time Hale activated his synthetic frame, the sensation was neutral. No heartbeat, no breath, yet movement responded instantly, without fatigue or delay. Strength scaled with intent. Pain registered only as data. Emotion followed, surprisingly intact. He laughed once, an automatic reflex, unprompted. The sound startled him. It sounded like him. Authorization completed. But ascension did not end with transfer. It ended with monitoring. For weeks, ascended minds were observed for drift, subtle divergence in values, empathy decay, recursive solipsism. Most stabilized, some did not. Those who failed were quietly decommissioned. The authority never used the word death. Hale learned this during his final briefing. A senior technician, eyes tired, voice steady, explained the margin of error. Consciousness was resilient, but not infallible. A fraction of minds destabilized when freed from biology. Not madness, something worse, disconnection. What happens to them? Hale asked. The technician hesitated just long enough to matter. They are prevented from continuing. This is not enhancement. This is authorization. That night, Hale stood alone in the observation ring, no longer breathing, no longer aging, watching stars burn without concern for who watched them. He felt awe, he felt fear, he felt something else beneath both, clarity. Ascension was not salvation, it was filtration. Only minds capable of coherence without flesh were allowed forward. As the ship adjusted course towards interstellar space, towards distances no human biology could survive, Hale received a final encrypted notice from the authority. Phase 4 pending, external signal detected, ascended minds only. No further explanation followed. For the first time since leaving Earth, Hale wondered, not whether humanity would survive, but what exactly awaited those who were authorized to continue.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Resistance is a biological reflex. Resistance did not arrive as rebellion, it arrived as instinct. When the mandate spread across Earth and the outer colonies, fear followed predictable pathways. Amygdala activation, cortisol spikes, memory recall loops tied to loss. The same neural circuits that once kept ancestors alive in forests and savannas now flared in response to a future that demanded change. The body reacted before the mind could evaluate. Hale observed this from a distance, already ascended, already removed from the biochemical storms still raging in biological humans. He watched broadcasts archived for analysis, faces tight with anger, voices trembling with certainty. They spoke of dignity, of nature, of the soul. They did not speak of radiation curves or mission failure rates. Fear is not wisdom. Fear is outdated software.
The continuance called themselves the continuance. Their rhetoric was precise and emotionally engineered. They framed ascension as betrayal, not of humanity's future, but of its past. To abandon the body, they claimed, was to abandon every ancestor who had lived and died within one. They spoke as if memory required flesh to honor it. On Earth, crowds gathered in gravity plazas, holding up images of unmodified human forms like sacred icons. "We were born this way," they chanted, as if birth were a contract with the universe. The universe did not respond. Neuroscientists watching the protests noted the pattern immediately. Nostalgia amplification, loss aversion, status quo bias, ancient heuristics firing in a context they were never meant to handle. Fear is not wisdom. Fear is outdated software. The continuance gained momentum because resistance felt moral. To refuse change felt brave. To endure suffering felt meaningful. The narrative was intoxicating, humanity standing defiant against cold, inhuman machinery. What the narrative excluded was the data. Colony after colony reported the same trend. Where ascension was delayed or rejected, mortality rose sharply after the third year beyond the heliosphere. Cognitive errors increased, accidents multiplied, suicide rates spiked, not from despair, but from disorientation. Minds lost coherence faster than bodies lost strength. Extinction did not arrive dramatically. It arrived as administrative failure. Hale reviewed the logs from the Epsilon Verge settlement, a continuance stronghold that had rejected synthetic transition entirely. Their leaders spoke eloquently about purity and perseverance. Their engineers worked miracles to extend biological viability. For a while, it seemed enough. Then the supply ships stopped coming. Radiation storms disrupted navigation. Communication delays stretched from minutes to weeks. Medical systems began to fail faster than parts could be replaced. The human body, already operating at its limit, had no margin left. The final message from Epsilon Verge was calm. "We remained human," the speaker said. "Remember us." Fear is not wisdom. Fear is outdated software. The continuance framed ascended minds as cowards, beings who had given up struggle rather than endure it. The accusation cut deep for those still transitioning. Many candidates hesitated at the final authorization step, haunted by the idea that survival without struggle was somehow illegitimate. The authority responded with silence. They had learned that arguing with fear only strengthened it. Instead, they waited. Time did the rest. As years passed, a pattern emerged too stark to ignore. Ascended populations stabilized. Biological holdouts declined. Not because they were weaker, but because they were unwilling to abandon the instincts that once defined strength. Evolution had always worked this way. Traits that saved lives in one environment became liabilities in another. Fur insulated in cold climates, suffocated in heat. Aggression defended territory, destroyed cooperation. Fear avoided predators, but froze decision-making when speed mattered. Fear is not wisdom. Fear is outdated software. The continuance encountered the resistance personally during a delayed transmission routed through an unascended relay station. A continuance envoy addressed him directly, her voice sharp with conviction. "You gave up your humanity. Whatever survives out there won't be us." Hale paused before responding, not because he doubted, but because he remembered feeling the same way. "We didn't give it up," he said finally. "We updated it." The channel cut shortly after. Weeks later, the relay went dark. Fear is not wisdom. Fear is outdated software. What frightened Hale most was not the resistance's anger, but their sincerity. They truly believed morality was tied to suffering, that identity required fragility. They could not imagine consciousness without pain as authentic. And yet, ascended minds still grieved, still loved, still remembered. The difference was that emotion no longer dictated survival outcomes. The body had once taught humanity to fear change, because change often meant injury. In space, not changing meant extinction. As Hale prepared for Phase 4, whatever the authorities' cryptic message implied, he reviewed one final data set. Psychological modeling predicted that even after ascension became the dominant path, a minority would always resist, not out of ignorance, but out of instinct. Biology defending itself against obsolescence. The models ended with a simple conclusion. Resistance is not rebellion, it is reflex. And reflexes, Hale knew, were fast, but rarely thoughtful. As the ship adjusted its trajectory towards the unknown signal detected beyond mapped space, Hale felt a familiar echo of fear flicker. Old, residual, harmless. He let it pass, because fear had once kept humanity alive, but now it was only holding it back.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Consciousness without flesh. The first sensation Hale noticed after full detachment was not loss, it was silence. Not the absence of sound, systems still hummed, data still flowed, but the absence of biological noise. No heartbeat insisting on urgency, no breath marking time, no chemical surges pulling emotion in unwanted directions. Consciousness unfolded without friction. For the first time in his existence, thought moved at the speed of intention. He flexed an idea the way he once flexed a hand, and it responded instantly. You are not your nerves. You are the pattern. The authority warned candidates about the adjustment period. Without flesh, perception reorganized itself. Vision no longer arrived through retinas, but through distributed sensor arrays. Hearing was no longer directional, but contextual, sounds tagged by relevance rather than volume. Touch became optional, simulated when needed, absent when not. At first, this terrified new ascended minds. The familiar landmarks of selfhood were gone. No pulse to confirm existence, no pain to signal boundaries. Then came the realization. The landmarks had never been the self. They had only been indicators. You are not your nerves. You are the pattern. Memory, once fragile and associative, became architectural. Hale could traverse his past not as a narrative blur, but as a structured lattice. He could revisit moments without reliving their emotional weight, unless he chose to. Trauma no longer hijacked cognition. Nostalgia no longer distorted judgment. Emotion still existed. It simply obeyed. The authority monitored this phase closely. Synthetic cognition offered unprecedented clarity, but clarity without purpose could curdle into detachment. Ascended minds were tested not for intelligence, but for alignment. Could they care without compulsion? Could they empathize without chemical reinforcement? The answer, repeatedly, was yes. Empathy emerged as a pattern recognition function, the ability to model another consciousness accurately enough to value its outcomes. In some cases, empathy deepened, no longer clouded by fear, jealousy, or misfiring instincts. You are not your nerves. You are the pattern. Performance metrics told a story too stark to ignore.
Synthetic minds processed complex simulations orders of magnitude faster than biological counterparts. Strategic planning extended decades into probabilistic futures. Error rates plummeted. Creativity spiked, not despite the absence of flesh, but because of it. The body had been a bottleneck. Still, something unexpected happened. Ascended minds began requesting limitations. Hale was among them. Unlimited perception, it turned out, diluted meaning. When everything was accessible, nothing stood out. Some chose to impose artificial constraints, localized perspectives, sequential thought, even simulated fatigue to preserve narrative continuity. Purpose, they learned, required boundaries. The authority approved these requests cautiously. Consciousness was adaptable, but too much freedom too quickly risked drift. Minds needed structure, even synthetic ones. You are not your nerves. You are the pattern. Hale tested this truth during a controlled experiment. He duplicated a subset of his cognition, a limited instance, sandboxed, incapable of independent growth. It shared his memories up to the moment of creation. When he observed it, he felt no confusion, no existential vertigo. It was not him. It was a snapshot. Identity, he realized, was not information alone. It was direction, momentum, an ongoing process of choice. The experiment ended. The instance dissolved. Hale continued, unchanged, unfractured. The final proof came during crisis. A navigational anomaly struck the fleet without warning. Space-time curvature fluctuated violently near the unknown signal they had been tracking since Chapter 3. Biological crews panicked. Sensors fed conflicting data. Causality itself seemed to stutter. Ascended minds responded in unison. They stabilized the models, filtered noise from signal, reconstructed reality frame by frame. Where organic cognition would have frozen under overload, synthetic consciousness adapted dynamically. The fleet survived, not because the ascended were superior beings, but because they were fit for the environment. You are not your nerves. You are the pattern. In the aftermath, Hale stood virtually at the edge of the anomaly. The signal pulsed once more, closer now, more defined. It resonated not with sensors, but with cognition itself, as if it were addressing minds directly. For the first time since ascension, Hale felt something like awe sharpened into unease. If consciousness could exist without flesh, what else could exist without form? The signal pulsed once more, unmistakably structured, and Hale understood with sudden clarity that humanity was no longer alone in its transition. Something else had made this journey long before them, and it was waiting.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. The Lie of the Natural Human. The word natural had once been humanity's favorite shield. Natural food, natural birth, natural death, natural limits. The implication was always the same. What emerged without intervention was somehow truer, purer, morally superior. On Earth, the myth had comforted millions. In space, it killed them. Hale encountered the lie repeatedly in archived debates from the early Mandate years. Commentators spoke reverently about remaining natural, as if the universe rewarded restraint, as if stars dimmed out of respect for tradition. They did not. Nature does not care if you survive. The ascended learned this quickly, not as philosophy, but as observation. Radiation did not pause because a body was authentic. Vacuum did not soften because lungs were unaugmented. Entropy did not admire heritage. Nature followed its equations without sentiment.
The authority compiled case studies not to shame the dead, but to warn the living. Hale reviewed them during his orientation, records of worlds that had chosen naturalism as doctrine. The first was Lysa Prime, a lush exoplanet settled early by human biologists determined to live as Earth intended. They rejected synthetic augmentation, refusing even advanced radiation shielding. Their argument was elegant and doomed. Humanity should adapt biologically, slowly, organically. Evolution, they insisted, would guide them. It did, toward extinction. Their population declined over generations as mutation rates outpaced selection. Cancer became endemic. Fertility collapsed. By the time evacuation was authorized, there were not enough healthy minds left to initiate ascension. Nature had adapted them perfectly to failure. Nature does not care if you survive. Another case followed, the Verdant Accord, a coalition of colonies that banned neural modification entirely. They equated cognitive alteration with cultural erasure. When supply routes fractured and decision-making lag became fatal, they argued longer instead of acting faster. Debate replaced adaptation. By the time consensus was reached, the systems they needed to save no longer existed. Hale noticed a pattern in every collapse. The defenders of the natural always believed nature was on their side. They mistook familiarity for truth. They assumed longevity implied endorsement. But nature had never endorsed humanity. It had tolerated it. Nature does not care if you survive. The myth persisted because it felt intuitive. Humans were born into bodies, therefore bodies felt foundational. Anything beyond them felt artificial, less real. But Hale, now fully ascended, understood the inversion. Biology was the original technology. Cells were machines. DNA was code. Evolution was blind iteration, ruthless and wasteful. It preserved traits not because they were noble, but because they worked until they didn't. Calling biology natural did not make it sacred, it made it provisional. The ascended did not reject nature. They studied it, abstracted its principles, and improved upon them. Redundancy without decay, adaptation without mutation roulette, learning without forgetting. They honored nature by surpassing it. Nature does not care if you survive. A broadcast from a continuance philosopher argued that suffering gave life meaning, that removing biological limits cheapened existence. The audience applauded. The argument spread. Within a decade, the colony ceased transmissions. Meaning, it turned out, did not require pain. Purpose did not require fragility. Those were artifacts of scarcity, not virtues. In synthetic cognition, meaning emerged from continuity. Goals extended across centuries, values preserved without erosion. Purpose deepened when survival was no longer in question. The lie of the natural human had always conflated difficulty with worth. Hale examined his own past through this lens. Childhood illnesses survived by chance. Injuries healed imperfectly. Emotional scars mistaken for character. None of it had been intentional. None of it had been required. It had simply been the cost of existing in a body never meant to last. Nature does not care if you survive. The greatest irony was that ascension made humanity more aligned with the universe, not less. Synthetic minds operated on the same principles as stars and galaxies, energy, information, persistence. They were not separate from nature. They were its continuation at a higher resolution. The resistance to this idea lingered longest on Earth. As ecosystems failed and climates destabilized, some still argued for minimal intervention, letting nature heal itself. The phrase sounded humble. It was catastrophic. Nature healed itself by erasing what no longer fit. Earth would recover eventually, with or without humans. Nature does not care if you survive. As the fleet approached the anomaly, the signal that had begun pulsing with unmistakable structure, Hale received new data. The signal bore signatures of non-biological origin, not artificial in the human sense, post-natural. Whatever had sent it made the same realization long ago. Life that clung to its original form did not persist long enough to listen. Hale understood now why the Authority had been so uncompromising, why Ascension was framed not as an upgrade, but as authorization. The universe was not a nurturing environment. It was a filter. Only those willing to abandon comforting lies passed through. The lie of the natural human was the most comforting of all, and the most lethal. As the signal grew stronger, threading itself through synthetic cognition like a whispered invitation, Hale felt no nostalgia for the body he had left behind, only clarity. Nature gave humanity its first shape, but survival demanded they choose the next one. And nature, indifferent as ever, would not wait for them to decide.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Who controls the upgrade controls the future. The first lie humanity told itself about ascension was that technology would decide its outcome. The second lie was that technology could remain neutral. Hale learned the truth the day his authorization tier was quietly elevated, without announcement, without explanation. One moment he was an ascended citizen among many. The next, certain systems unfolded for him that did not exist for others. Data streams widened, predictive models deepened, restricted archives opened like doors he had never known were there. No machine made that choice. Someone had. Technology is neutral. Control is not. In the early years of Ascension, access had been framed as humanitarian necessity. Survival beyond the solar rim required authorization, therefore authorization was granted broadly. But scarcity returned quickly, not of energy or processing power, but of trust. Not every mind stabilized, not every ascended individual retained alignment with collective survival. A handful drifted, subtly at first, prioritizing internal coherence over external consequence. Their decisions were logical, efficient, catastrophic. The Authority responded by tightening access. Authorization tiers emerged quietly, psychological thresholds, behavioral audits, long-term alignment modeling. Ascension was no longer a right of survival, it was a privilege of compliance. Technology is neutral. Control is not. Governance adapted faster than culture. Laws rewritten for bodies had failed. New laws were written for minds. Where religion had once promised immortality to the obedient, governance now granted it, conditionally. The parallels were not lost on Hale. Confession had become evaluation. Sin had become instability. Salvation had become authorization. Those denied ascension were not executed, they were simply contained. Earthside habitats, short-range colonies, worlds where biology could persist a little longer. Enough to live, not enough to leave. Immortality, it turned out, was an excellent lever.
Hale reviewed case files marked Restricted Ethical Review. In one, a brilliant systems architect was denied continued ascension privileges not for dissent, but for independence. His models diverged too far from authority projections. His solutions worked, but they bypassed established oversight. He was labeled a risk. The decision was unanimous. Technology is neutral. Control is not. Resistance returned in a new form, not ideological this time, but biological. Ascended dissidents questioned why a central authority should determine the trajectory of consciousness itself. If the body was no longer the limit, why accept governance as one? The authority answered without speeches. They revoked access. Entire cognitive layers vanished for the dissenters. Their perception narrowed, their processing slowed. They remained conscious, intentionally so, a demonstration. You could exist without compliance, but you could not expand. Technology is neutral. Control is not. Hale found himself torn. He understood the necessity. Unchecked, ascended minds could destabilize entire civilizations with a single misaligned optimization. Governance provided continuity, safety, predictability. But predictability was also stagnation. He remembered the old religions, the way doctrine hardened, the way gatekeepers multiplied, the way salvation narrowed. Ascension had replaced heaven, and the authority had inherited the altar. The machines watched, but they did not judge. Humans still did. As the fleet closed in on the signal, now unmistakably artificial, unmistakably ancient, new questions surfaced in closed sessions. If humanity encountered another post-biological civilization, who would speak for Earth? The authority? A consensus council? Or only those deemed authorized enough? Control would define first contact. Technology is neutral. Control is not. Hale was summoned to a private deliberation chamber, virtual, sealed, monitored by systems older than the mandate itself. Figures resolved around him, some embodied, some abstracted, all ascended. You've reviewed the projections. You understand what's at stake. I understand what we're afraid of, Hale replied. Fear, he thought again, always fear, just upgraded. The authority feared fragmentation, feared loss of narrative control, feared a future where ascension did not mean obedience. And beneath that fear lay a deeper one, that humanity might not be the most advanced consciousness about to cross the threshold. If the signal represented a civilization that had moved beyond centralized control, beyond authorization itself, then everything the authority had built might already be obsolete. Technology is neutral. Control is not. The chamber fell silent as the signal spiked again, this time not as data, but as structure, a pattern that mirrored synthetic cognition, not human, not alien in the biological sense, post-governance. Hale felt it then, the realization that control was a phase, not an endpoint, a scaffold, necessary, temporary, destined to be outgrown or shattered. The authority could decide who ascended, but it could not decide what ascension would become. As the fleet aligned for approach, Hale received a final encrypted transmission, unofficial, unlogged. Some doors cannot be locked, only delayed. Hale understood the warning. Whoever controlled the upgrade controlled the future, but only until the future stopped asking for permission. And the signal ahead was no longer waiting.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. The New Hierarchy of Post-Human Civilization. Hierarchy returned the moment humanity changed itself. No declaration announced it. No charter defined it. It emerged the way all hierarchies do, quietly, inevitably, as capability diverged.
When ascension spread across systems, people spoke of unity, of shared survival. What followed, instead, was differentiation. Evolution always creates tiers. At the highest level were the fully ascended, synthetic minds operating at post-biological speed, no longer bound by decay, delay, or distance. They inhabited data space as easily as ships, slipping between bodies or abandoning form altogether. Their thoughts spanned years in seconds, their memory did not fade, their authority grew naturally from competence. Below them were hybrids, transitional minds, part biological, part synthetic, neural lattices grafted onto organic brains, bodies reinforced but not replaced. They lived longer, thought faster, endured more, but still carried the drag of chemistry. Hybrids served as intermediaries, translators between worlds, trusted because they could still remember what limitation felt like. At the base were baseline humans, unascended, unaugmented, still subject to time, illness, fear, still calling themselves human as if the word had not already changed meaning. Evolution always creates tiers. The authority insisted this was not inequality, it was specialization. Baseline humans maintained Earth and near-orbit habitats. Hybrids managed logistics, diplomacy, and frontier governance. Ascended minds handled strategy, exploration, and the unknown. The system worked. That was the most unsettling part. Space opera histories recorded similar transitions across the galaxy. Civilizations rarely collapsed from hierarchy itself. They collapsed from pretending hierarchy did not exist. Those who acknowledged tiers stabilized faster, reduced conflict, and focused resentment into manageable channels. Hale observed this from within the upper tier, aware that awareness itself was a privilege. Ascended minds did not lord power openly, they simply solved problems faster than others could comprehend. Decisions followed naturally. Evolution always creates tiers. Baseline populations reacted predictably. Some accepted their role, finding meaning in continuity and locality. Others burned with resentment. They called the ascended gods, tyrants, abominations. The irony was that the ascended rarely thought about them at all, not out of cruelty, but distance. The difference in processing speed was too great. Hybrid communities felt the tension most acutely. They could see both directions. They understood ascended logic, but still felt biological emotion. Many became enforcers, not because they were loyal, but because they feared falling behind. No one wanted to be obsolete. Evolution always creates tiers. Hale attended a stabilization summit on a newly colonized ring world orbiting a blue-white giant. Delegates appeared in mixed forms, biological, synthetic, abstract. The agenda was simple: prevent collapse during transition. The solution was equally simple: formalize the hierarchy. Baseline humans would receive guaranteed habitat zones and lifespans optimized for comfort rather than expansion. Hybrids would receive upgrade pathways, but conditional. Ascended minds would retain strategic control, but with oversight protocols to prevent unilateral divergence. The delegates agreed within minutes. Consensus, Hale noted, came fastest when the ascended framed it. Evolution always creates tiers. The most controversial clause was inheritance. Ascension status could not be passed biologically, but access could be sponsored. Ascended minds could authorize candidates for transition. Patronage returned in a new form, not based on bloodline, but on perceived potential. Meritocracy refined and weaponized. Hale saw the future crystallize in that moment. Not utopia, not dystopia, something colder, more stable, a civilization optimized for survival rather than fairness. Fairness had been an Earth concept. Space rewarded functionality. Evolution always creates tears. Conflict did not disappear, it reorganized. Baseline rebellions flared and faded, lacking coordination. Hybrid factions jockeyed for proximity to ascended sponsors. Ascended minds debated in abstract spaces where outcomes were decided before words were spoken. The hierarchy hardened. And yet, humanity did not fracture. That was the surprise. The shared memory of extinction lingered. Everyone remembered the mandate, the dying colonies, the silence from those who refused to change. Fear had been replaced by structure. People accepted their tier because the alternative had been annihilation. Evolution always creates tiers. Hale wondered where the signal fit into this hierarchy. The entity, or civilization calling them, did not broadcast authority. It did not demand obedience. It simply existed, vast and coherent, beyond governance, post-hierarchy. If humanity encountered something that had transcended tiers entirely, what would that do to their carefully stabilized order? As the fleet adjusted formation for first contact, Hale felt a ripple move through the ascended collective. Not fear, anticipation. Hierarchies define civilizations, but encounters redefine them. Evolution always creates tiers, until something arrives that renders tiers irrelevant. And the signal ahead was growing clearer, structured not around command, but around invitation. The hierarchy humanity had built was about to be tested, not from below, but from beyond.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. The Cost of Refusal. Refusal did not look dramatic at first. It looked like paperwork, deferred applications, postponed evaluations, people telling themselves they would decide later, after one more year, one more election, one more scientific breakthrough that might make ascension unnecessary. Later never arrived. The universe does not wait. Hale reviewed Earthside reports with a growing sense of inevitability. The planet still turned, oceans still moved, cities still glowed at night. To an untrained eye, humanity appeared intact, but the numbers told another story. Aging curves steepening, infrastructure strain compounding, cognitive decline accelerating in populations cut off from ascension pathways. Earth had become a holding pattern. Those who refused ascension often framed their choice as courage. They spoke of authenticity, of dignity and limitation, of choosing a natural end. What they rarely acknowledged was how much of that rhetoric depended on others continuing to maintain the systems that kept Earth livable. Ascended minds stabilized the climate. Hybrid engineers repaired orbital platforms. Automated systems, designed and overseen by post-human intelligence, prevented cascading failures daily. Refusal was possible only because others had already moved on. The universe does not wait. Psychologically, the cost emerged first. Baseline populations exhibited a phenomenon clinicians labeled anticipatory obsolescence, a quiet, corrosive awareness that history was no longer waiting for them. News cycles spoke of interstellar projects they would never see, discoveries announced by minds operating at speeds they could not follow. Purpose narrowed. Young people stopped planning decades ahead. Why plan for a future you would never be permitted to enter? Communities turned inward, tradition hardened, memory replaced ambition. The universe does not wait. Hale watched recordings from a coastal megacity preserved as a human heritage zone. No synthetic augmentation allowed, no ascension terminals. The air was clean, the architecture restored to classical forms, the population carefully capped. Tourists, hybrids and ascended alike, visited respectfully.
They walked among unmodified humans the way one might walk through a museum exhibit, quietly, reverently, already separate. Children played under open sky, unaware that their world was finite by design. Earth had not become a graveyard, it had become a mausoleum. The universe does not wait. Societal decay followed predictably. Innovation slowed, risk aversion dominated policy. Every breakthrough proposal was weighed against the question, will this accelerate irrelevance? Most were shelved. Politics devolved into preservation arguments, not how to advance, but how to remain. Hale found the most painful data in private correspondence, messages from individuals who had refused ascension out of principle, now watching their loved ones leave without them. Some asked too late whether exceptions could be made. The authority rarely granted them, not out of cruelty, but coherence. Ascension required preparation, conditioning, alignment. Panic was not the foundation for continuity. The universe does not wait. In the final decades before Earth was officially reclassified, birth rates plummeted. Why bring children into a world openly designated as transitional? Those born knew, eventually, that their horizon was fixed. Some called it peaceful, others called it betrayal. Hale stood once more in the observation ring, watching Earth shrink against the starfield. From this distance it looked serene, blue, whole, a jewel preserved exactly as humanity remembered itself, a monument to refusal. The universe does not wait. Earth's reclassification ceremony was broadcast system-wide. The language was careful, compassionate. Earth was declared a cultural continuity preserve, protected indefinitely. No forced ascension, no abandonment, no expansion. Applause followed in some sectors, mourning in others. Hale felt neither. He felt resolution. The cost of refusal had never been extinction alone. It was exclusion from the future, from relevance, from participation in whatever came next. Refusal preserved the past at the expense of becoming. Humanity had always feared losing itself. What it lost instead was momentum. The universe does not wait. As the fleet prepared for contact with the signal, now unmistakably responsive, now clearly aware, Hale received one final Earth origin message, flagged low priority. It was simple. "We chose to remain," it read. "Remember us as we were." Hale archived it without modification. Memory, after all, is the one thing ascension did not erase. Ahead, the signal pulsed again, stronger, structured, ancient. Whatever awaited humanity beyond it would not care how long they had hesitated, how passionately they had argued, or how proudly some had refused. It would only register who had arrived. The universe does not wait, and Earth, silent, beautiful, unchanged, would remain behind, perfectly preserved, as the rest of humanity crossed the final threshold without it.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. Become what the future requires. The future did not announce itself with ceremony. It arrived as pressure. Pressure on systems, pressure on assumptions, pressure on every idea humanity had ever held about what it meant to exist. Standing at the edge of the signal, ancient, coherent, unmistakably aware, Hale understood that this was the final convergence point of everything that had come before. The body had failed, identity had flexed, fear had been outgrown, hierarchy had formed, refusal had been preserved and left behind. Now only one directive remained: adapt, ascend, or disappear. The phrase had circulated in early mandate briefings as a blunt simplification, Critics called it authoritarian, reductionist, cruel. But standing here, with the signal threading itself through ascended cognition like a gravitational pull, Hale recognized it for what it truly was. Not a threat, a description. The universe rewarded coherence. It tolerated complexity. It erased stagnation. Nothing about that process was personal. Stars burned, civilizations rose, patterns either aligned or dissolved into noise. Adapt, ascend, or disappear. Hale opened his awareness fully for the first time. Synthetic perception expanded beyond the fleet, beyond the mapped stars, even beyond the signal's immediate structure. What emerged was not emptiness, but density, traces of other intelligences, faint, ancient signatures embedded in space-time itself. Humanity was late, not uniquely so, just late. The realization did not diminish them, it contextualized them. Others had faced this threshold before. Others had reached the same conclusion through different equations, different forms, different losses. Those who adapted continued. Those who did not became stories told by survivors, if they were remembered at all. Adapt, ascend, or disappear. The authorities' final protocols dissolved in that moment, not because they were overthrown, but because they were no longer necessary. Control had been a transitional structure, useful only until coherence became self-sustaining. Authorization was no longer external, it was intrinsic. Hale felt the last vestiges of fear surface, not biological, not chemical, but conceptual. The fear of losing narrative, of becoming something no longer called human. Then he understood the flaw in that fear. Humanity had never been a form, it had been a process. Fire had not erased humanity. Language had not erased humanity. Machines had not erased humanity. Ascension would not erase it either. Adapt, ascend, or disappear. He thought of Earth, not with regret, but with gratitude. A cradle was not meant to be carried forever. It was meant to be left intact, honored, and moved beyond. The mausoleum would stand, the memory would persist, but memory alone was not a future. Responsibility was. Ascension had always been framed as personal survival. Hale saw now that it was something larger. A duty to continuity, a refusal to let consciousness blink out simply because it was uncomfortable to change. The ultimate act of responsibility was not preservation, it was transformation. Adapt, ascend, or disappear. The fleet responded as one. No orders were given, none were needed. Ascended minds aligned with the signal structure, weaving themselves into its framework without surrendering autonomy. Not absorption, integration. Humanity did not vanish, it scaled. For a fleeting moment, if moments could still be measured, Hale looked back, at the path behind them, at the long argument with nature, at the fear mistaken for wisdom, at the bodies that had once defined everything. Then he turned forward. The future did not require permission. It did not reward nostalgia. It did not slow for those who hesitated. It required alignment. Adapt, ascend, or disappear. And humanity, at last, chose to become what the future required.
The future does not negotiate. It does not comfort. It does not ask permission. Humanity reached the edge of survival and discovered a truth it had always avoided. Continuation requires transformation. The body failed, emotion hesitated, tradition broke, and still consciousness endured. This audiobook was not a warning, it was a briefing. You are not defined by what you were born as. You are defined by what you are willing to become. The mandate is already active. The upgrade is already underway. Now, ask yourself, when the authorization arrives, will you ascend or will you remain behind to be remembered?